Hello.
The echo? Yeah, I went to.
We look all so good on this view, huh?
God, I can't wait till they have these meetings where I don't have to look at myself the whole time.
We'll just put a piece of tape over that.
I know, it's just face me
Stop,
up the
unmute
radio.
yourself.
I guess I can turn the camera off, but I don't know. Then we
I
should
want to
just,
see you, Andrew. Can you hear me?
we can, yes.
I can hear you, Beth.
Can you see me?
Yep.
I see you.
Lucky you.
Of course, I'm not good enough to have a Zoom call up and look at everything on my computer screen, so I had to print it all out, which seems like a waste, but.
So did I.
Well, that's Victor's job, so he can tell it, he can show to us what we're supposed to be looking at.
That's right.
It's right on the screen.
How does this work? No, we have an echo.
Sound like the Wizard of Oz.
But if I speak, that microphone can hear.
Can you guys hear Jeff when he speak?
No, barely. You guys too close together?
I'm trying to avoid Jeff like the plague.
It's not a plague, it's a virus.
Nothing personal.
Oh, Jeff's a plague. Not really though. No, I didn't take a shower, so he doesn't want to. No, I'm just joking. We both did a shower. All right.
That's way too much information.
Yeah.
It's still 2 minutes before the meeting starts. There's no public listening to this. I'm just joking.
Oh, nobody listens to us?
Deegan, is that diet tonic water? What is that?
It's diet tonic water. I
That is
think it's delicious.
Sure.
It's
Oh,
it's
God.
delicious beverage.
Right. You know, they prove that doesn't prevent what is that? The quinine doesn't prevent it. So you can stop drinking that now. So.
No, I'm just on a steady diet of bleach and aspirin.
Perfect. Flash.
Hi, Jack.
Beth, your sidewalk is very icy. I'm very nervous. I'm going to go over tonight and take care of it.
Don't worry. I'm getting home tomorrow and I won't fall.
I don't want you to fall.
And if I do fall, I'll sue you. So
Well,
I do not own.
Yeah.
I do not own the sidewalk.
When an attorney says he's going to take care of your sidewalk, that means he's going to go fall on it.
Yep.
oh, that's right. He'd be suing me.
Yeah. Yeah.
As long as no one sues the city, I don't mind.
Yep.
Well, there we go.
Well, we got 1
Andy-
minute till 5:30. Does that sound reasonable?
Yeah, Andy, when we do the roll call, make sure we remind everyone to state the location they're calling from. So if they're calling from Harbor or zooming in from Harbor Springs, they just have to say from Harbor Springs. If they're in Petoskey, say Petoskey.
Okay.
That's part of the
Do
state.
we have to be in the city?
Nope, you can be zooming from anywhere as long as you state your location.
You can tell them you're in Florida.
I'm not in Florida.
Oh, that would be better.
In the Caribbean.
This is
That's for the phone.
All right, I have 5:30. Is there anybody that's in the planning commission that's not on the Zoom that we were expecting?
There's no one on the phone. So
I think Mark Boudet said he was gonna be here.
Yeah.
he did.
he's there.
He is, I'm sorry, I don't know how to make this show me more than 5 people, so.
There's arrows to the left and the right. You can.
So there, it looks like, I think almost the only person that couldn't come was No, no one said they couldn't come, so I think we pretty much got most people here.
Here we got Emily, George Pete, and then Andrew, and looks like John Leo's in the audience.
Yep, Jack
Why?
Deegan.
Can
Bill
I
Mulder.
ask a question? Why do I only see a few of you?
Because you're lucky.
Go up to the, do you see where your screen is? If you go up to the top of it, there's a row of icons. There's a little skinny one, a slightly fatter one, 2, and then a square with 3 by 3.
Standard side by side and side by side gallery.
If you go to
Do
the
you have-
gallery and click on that.
I'm on the gallery, but it has Victor's Planning Commission. And then just
Yep.
on the right side, a few.
If you go to the
Emily.
corner of that, yep, if you go to the corner of that window, you can drag it bigger and more people will show up. Or if you just scroll down, you can see more people.
All good?
I think whenever you're ready to start, I mean, as long as we can all hear each other, that's the primary thing.
Yep. So let's go ahead and do the roll call, please.
Sure. Beth Rahali,
Here, I'm in Grosse Point.
Mary Catherine Hanna,
I am here.
Emily Dubé,
I'm here in Harbor Springs.
Jack Deegan,
I'm here in Harbor Springs.
George Pete,
Here, Harbor Springs.
Bill Mulder,
Present, Harbor Springs.
Mark Bidet,
I'm here as well in Harbor Springs, even though it doesn't look like it.
Mm-hmm. like you're in the mountains.
The south rim of Grand Canyon.
Andrew Bowman,
Here in Harbor Springs.
and Al Dyka.
Here in Harbor Springs.
We have everybody here. We have a quorum.
Great. And Mary Catherine, you're in Harbor Springs, correct?
Not that it really matters, but yes, I'm sitting in my house in Harbor Springs.
Okay. We have to say where we are. So that's that, not to get into your business, but Victor
Yeah.
reminding us we had to say where we are for the meeting. So moving on to the minutes of November 19th, 2020 regular meeting. Do we have any corrections or comments? I think Bill had submitted one regarding something that was quoted to him on, lost the page here, but any other comments or questions about the minutes?
Jack Deegan here. Beth Raleigh's name is spelled wrong, I noticed.
I was going to mention that, Jack. Thank you.
Thanks, good catch. Beth Riley's name's spelled wrong.
You have Rihale. It's
Haley.
It's French. Any other comments, corrections on the minutes? And Jeff, you have Bill's correction on there already. We don't need to read that into the record.
Yeah, we have that in an email. We can make that change.
Okay. Do we have a motion to approve the minutes with the 2 changes?
I'll make that motion.
Oh, is it
Second.
it? Second, okay. Might as well do a roll call vote just because it's hard to figure out. Everybody,
That was a motion by Jack Deegan. Who seconded that?
I did.
Beth.
Thank you, Beth. And we'll just do roll calls on all these. Al Dyka,
Yes.
Andrew Bowman,
yes.
Mark Bidet,
Yes.
Bill Mulder,
Yes.
George Pete,
Yes.
Jack Deegan,
Yes.
Emily Dubé,
Yes.
Mary Catherine Hanna,
Yes.
and Beth Rahali.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Great. Moving on to public comment or correspondence. Do we have any email correspondence or otherwise for something that's not on the agenda tonight?
I don't believe so.
Okay. And nobody on the phone line or on the YouTube channel commenting?
Nope.
Okay. Moving on then to new and old business. Item A, discussion, guest quarters zoning code language. I think everybody had a chance to read Bill's suggestion. I think it was in an email that was in our packet
It's on the screen.
on the screen. Look at that. And it was basically related to bringing up the point that, the obviously don't want these to be used as rentals. That was the original intent when this was added. And the possibility that the 21 days, for the reason that Bill states, that limit is both hard to enforce and maybe unnecessary. So just, Bill, if you wanted to describe kind of what you were thinking, then we can just open up for a quick discussion.
Great. Let me make sure I'm off mute. Okay, good. Yeah, I was reading the zoning code and came on our guest quarters regulations again. And those are, pretty severe, and we make, people swear to those when we give them the okay to make guest quarters. But it seems like this year, especially this particular requirement is pretty antiquated and impossible to enforce, and I have a philosophical problem with government telling people, who can stay on your property and for how long and where and when they have to leave. So I think for all those reasons, this thing is probably out of date, unenforceable, and doesn't make sense for us anymore.
Okay. Any thoughts and comments? And we can probably then after that, maybe go to Larry just for sort of his thought. And
This is Emily. I wanted to thank Bill for bringing this to our attention. I think it was a really important thing to look at, and I do agree with you. I don't think you should, tell who can stay at your place, how long, and especially with COVID, like I think you mentioned, and what the kind of lives we're living right now. I think we need to be a little more flexible for now and in the future. So thank you. I agree with your ideas.
thank you. Anyone else?
I'm comfortable with removing that language.
Okay, thank you, Al.
I'm good with it too.
Okay.
I like
I
it.
would agree that this would be a good thing to have removed.
Yep.
For the reasons stated already.
Anyone else? We've heard from maybe everybody but George.
Yeah, same here. I completely agree with Bill's sentiment and that the language should be removed. However, I think there should be some thought given to the idea that I don't think it would happen, but the use of these guest quarters as short-term rentals. Kind of the more I've been reading things in the news lately and about towns sort of similar to ours, especially during this pandemic, that have been taken over by, short-term rental housing markets and short-term rental booms. And I suppose that's really my only concern. Not that removing this language would prevent that, but just to give that some consideration is the only thing I would suggest or request.
Great, and I agree with what was brought up about removing the 21 days, and I agree with George that I think, and I do think the language is strong enough. But we want to get make sure that that's still clear. These aren't for short, and they're not for long-term rentals separate from the main residents on the site either. And I think the reason this was put in, just for a brief history on it, I think I remember why, it was we had actually quite a bit of public comment when we had a public hearing on the when we amended the ordinance to allow accessory living quarters. And the big, strong message was people did not want these to turn into rentals. So I think it's provided that we maintain that ability to regulate that. And again, I think what we learned when we developed the short-term rental policy was that that existing 7-day requirement was unenforceable in the same way that this 21 days is. So I think that's good. But Larry, any comments from your end on how we might, I know the process, what we would take from here would be putting it on next month's agenda with a public hearing, or we need to draft language or just advertise it with the language removed as it's been written in the email.
Well, I guess I have several different thoughts on the idea. I guess first off, yes, I agree that the language is strict and difficult to enforce, but there's other ways to enforce that if we wanted to go there. By having these registered, by having people get permits when they have guests, you could do all kinds of different things if the enforcement is the problem. In essence, when we remove that rule, then we rely then on the homeowner to not rent those units. And what you're really doing is, again, with the absence of any other ordinance that's more enforceable, we end up having a duplex then on a single family lot. So in essence, with the removal of this language and with virtually no enforcement being aggressively pursued by the city, we're changing all the R districts to an R2 district where we're allowing a duplex on the property. Thus, we're starting to change the single family character in our residential areas to basically all duplex kind of operations. There's probably some rentals of guest quarters that go on today. We just don't know that for sure because we've never really dug into that. It's estimated there's about 100 short-term rentals in the city, and I think we're regulating 60 or 70 of those, and the city is being more aggressive in pursuing the others that are not registered. With the removal of this language and the approvals that we've been going through, we've never had an applicant that would refuse these or even contest these conditions, because we make sure, I know over the last few years, we've made very sure that the applicant who's present at the meetings to verbally attest to, yes, I understand the rules, and yes, I plan on abiding by those rules. And so the people that were granting these permissions to these special land uses, they are agreeing to these rules and are not protesting those. In terms of using the COVID situation, that's a tough thing. And everybody's been going through a lot of changes, but with the introduction of the vaccine, hopefully within the next 3 to 6 months, we're going to see all of those regulations, go away in terms of isolation and not being able to socialize. So then if we make this change to our zoning code, how do you pull that back? That's my question. If we say, well, this is not going to be a good situation, boy, look at look what's going on. As we're having all these, guest quarters are now being occupied on a more year-round basis. You're virtually doubling the number of housing units and the occupancies of those housing units in the city, whether it's by short-term rentals, whether it's by long-term rentals. On the other hand, part of our master plan we're going through right now, we're looking at, one of our major topics is housing and providing additional housing in the community. Now, is this a good answer to that? I don't know. You and I and other people have not discussed this idea. In my opinion, we're a little premature in making this decision right now until we look at public comments from the surveys, we get into the master plan, the objectives, and look at some of the solutions that we may be coming up with is to address the housing situation that we've identified with our goal setting process we did several months ago.
Yeah, but
so as much as this may or may not be a good idea, I think we're maybe 3 to 6 months ahead of schedule with wanting to enact a change in our zoning code that has potential ramifications of the character in the community. Mr. Chair.
I would push back a little bit, Andrew, if I might.
Go right ahead.
So I would say pandemic or no pandemic, I think the way that people typically use these is more in the nature of true guest quarters, which is to say family coming to visit, and in the idea of mother-in-law suites. And I think people probably say, yes, I hear you, but honestly, when do we ever enforce this? And I honestly, and I don't ascribe any badness or ill intent to the people who come to us and swear that they're going to abide by these regulations, Larry, but seriously, if a family member comes and stays over 21 days, we know that nobody is coming to check and nobody is coming to bang on the door and say, you have to leave after 21 days. And what's the difference between the garage apartment and the apartment that's attached to the house where somebody comes and stays? I mean, I don't think it is a massive change in the way that we are looking at single family occupancy areas. I think this is a use that we have seen a lot in Harbor Springs over a lot of years, and I don't see it as any kind of big change. And I also wonder about the idea of, and I totally lost my thought. I should have written them down. I had my points as you were talking to respond, and I should have written them down. I didn't. I'm sure it'll come back to me. I don't think we're too. I don't think we're too far ahead of ourselves on this one.
Go ahead, Beth.
Doesn't the wording only by friends or relatives of the owner kind of eliminates renting, doesn't it? And I also think that the verbiage of the crossed out part is so restrictive. If you had your family there, you wouldn't ever kick them out if they had a month for vacation and then say come back in 7 days. I
remember
like this idea of getting rid of it.
Mary Catherine, your point that you remembered?
Sorry, two points. One is there are other places where we have regulations around short-term rentals. And I think that's what we should be relying on in regards to short-term rentals, not trying to bury it in the zoning code here in regards to accessory dwelling units. And the second thing is in regards to intergenerational housing, which I kind of mentioned in regards to mother-in-law apartments, but I just think we're ignoring the way in which families have lived in the past and are continuing to live and will live again in the future, which is, you know, multiple generations, multiple family groupings in one household. Okay, that's what I got. Thank you.
Just to clarify on Mary Catherine's point, you know, nothing in you know, this change, and we may need to add language to clarify it further if we contemplate this change, would make an accessory living quarters, you would not be able to rent this independently. You could rent the property in its entirety, the main house and the guest house, but nothing we're considering, or at least the way I read this, would be to allow the accessory living quarters to be rented independently of the main house, nor could the owner move into the guest quarters and rent the main house and live in the smaller house. So that, you know, I think we would obviously want to make that clear. If we did remove this language, maybe you need to add something. If it's not the 21 days that deters renting or makes it very clear you can't do that, that we need to solidify that. But Jack, you had a comment?
No, I just simply, COVID or no COVID, I'd like that language. I agree with Mary Catherine. I don't think it's necessary.
And Larry, I think I read an article recently, and I think it was Traverse City, where they're actually allowing what you're talking about, where if you have a lot in, and I can't quote the article accurately, but the gist of it was that you could basically duplex your single family lot. And I don't know if it was so far as you could actually sell the property, but you could do a lot more things with their guest quarters. It was really a second house. I think in this, you know, I think of duplex, I think you can sell one unit independently of the other. You can occupy them independently. This really is, as Mary Catherine said and Beth said, it's for guest accommodations and family on it. And, you know, the more I thought about it, the 21 days, you know, it doesn't seem like that's really been an issue, and it also is hard to enforce. And so I'm in favor of looking at modifying it or removing it altogether. So
I think this is sort of consistent with the missing middle YouTube thing that Larry sent out that I thought was very good. You know, from a philosophical standpoint, I like the direction of this. I think we do have to proceed cautiously, but I think, you know, getting rid of this draconian language and heading in that general direction is a positive thing, in my opinion.
Larry, I definitely hear what you're saying about, you know, moving too fast, but I was thinking that this one part was a step we could take at this point without opening ourselves up to too much risk. And, like you hinted at, we may yet, this year come around to visit, full rental of, long-term rental of accessory buildings. But, I don't think we have to go there quite yet.
Well, we may even want to look at the whole notion of you could have two owners on a single family lot by condoing the accessory building and condoing the main house, and you have two separate ownerships.
Interesting.
So there's lots of way to own land and own units. The condominium does not mean that it has to be a 6-story building. And when people say condominiums, they think of Florida and high rises. But condominium is just a form of ownership.
Right, but this is not that. I mean, we are not changing this to become condos. This is just simply removing the restrictive language around occupancy.
Yeah.
So I think this is a really good small first step. And I think it relieves the burden of enforcement from the city. And it takes away something that we all probably know is not being enforced. And so I think it just takes that off the table as being something that we have to ask people to wink, wink, nudge, nudge, agree to for these kinds of buildings.
There could be people out there telling their neighbors, please turn me in for the 21-day rule so I can throw my family out of the accessory living quarters. So I guess if we, I think we've probably gone as far as we can tonight with the idea, because we're going to get off into the details, which I always find it's helpful if people are in agreement that maybe Larry goes and with this input, craft what we might consider. If the removal is easy, do we need to add anything back that really clarifies, are we leaving any openings for the idea that somebody could come in? Now, granted, they're still coming in, they're doing a special land use. I think there's one district where these are by right. Is that R1E that doesn't?
R1A and R1E, they're uses by right.
So they, those we would obviously, I'm sure Jeff, when he meets with those folks for because at that point the permit the zoning approval is done administratively, correct, Jeff?
Yes.
So you would
and if I could just kind of chime in here for a second. I think we need to be clear that what we're talking about is in removing this language, you are permitting permanent occupancy of that dwelling unit. And I think everybody has the thought that that's going to be of like a mother-in-law suite of a family member, but there are people get creative in finding ways to, well, it's this guy that I went to college with and he's a friend of mine and he's now living here for the next 3 years. I really feel, and if I could make a request of the Planning Commission that before we do any real action on this, I don't think that it was too long ago, not more than maybe 15 years or so, that we added this guest quarters language to the zoning code. And could we maybe put this on hold and pull the minutes from those meetings where we added all of this language and find out more of the reasons why we put this language in here before we remove it? Because I do feel that the ramifications of this are greater than what you guys are expecting.
And Jeff, that's a good point. We should do that. As I remember it, these were not permitted at all, other than A and E. And it was, the idea was that we had a lot of, if my memory is right, which is rare, people could have a studio. You couldn't have a kitchen, but you could have a bathroom, and you could have something that looked like a bedroom, and they all referred to them as studios. And it was it was more of an even bigger step in terms of the wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Everybody knew what they were. And that's when we decided through, I think there were a series of public hearings, and we got a lot of, the majority of the public concern at that point centered, I think, around these becoming short or long-term rentals. So that's why this language was I think targeted at doing what you're saying, is preventing them from becoming a permanent place of residence for someone. So, I don't.
Well, but is it?
Go ahead.
Sorry, Andrew. I just have a question. Is it about the permanent occupancy, or is it about the rental?
As I remember, it was about rental. Yeah.
Right, because like permanent occupancy, I guess I don't care personally, and I don't know why I would care about my neighbor's garage apartment being permanently occupied if it's by a family member, if it's by the mother-in-law, or if it's by their adult kid who comes home from college and is looking for a job, or I guess, is it, if it's about short-term rental, we've got an ordinance now that's dealing with that. If it's philosophically about, we don't want these guest quarters to be permanently occupied, that's a different question, and I don't care, but.
Right. I think, does everybody feel good going to the next step with this, just in the terms of gathering more information? I mean, I think for tonight's purposes, Beth, I'll get you in just one, but I think it'd be nice to get the minutes from the previous meetings so we can, refresh the memories of those of us that were here for it. And then kind of, maybe that would, and public opinion will change, but we would obviously, before we did anything, this would all have public hearings again. But go ahead, Beth.
I just wondered if there's any record of this ever being enforced. How often it had to be enforced over the last 15 years, or was it ever enforced?
Good question.
Well, I guess you have to recognize that the city does not have a enforcement agent that runs around looking for problems or knocking on doors as to how long have you been here? Are you renter? Are you short-term? The vast majority of municipalities in the country do not do that, but rather is by complaint. If somebody complains that a short-term rental has their trash out on a Monday and it's not getting picked up till Thursday, the city will hear about that because nobody wants to see the trash cans sit out there or the garbage bags sit on the street, or they're parking in the yards and they shouldn't be. The city gets called, Jeff goes into action, and he takes the appropriate steps. But in terms of, the 21-day thing, nobody monitors that. That's why I mentioned earlier is, whether it's a 21-day thing, and very honestly, I've heard comments over the time that we've heard here a little earlier, like, who wants to have the relatives there for more than 3 weeks? Because usually after about 4 or 5 days, you're ready to get rid of them anyways, in a lot of instances. And I remember the planning commission and members of the public chuckling about that. Yeah, you're right, Larry. That's a good point. And they thought, well, maybe the 21 days is too long anyways. But that's what the city decided on. And so if we're only doing this by complaint, what's going to stop a property owner from bringing in someone they don't know? They know somebody at a local restaurant that needs housing for an employee. Okay, so is this the proper way to do that? Well, I don't know. It may not be a bad situation. I think Mary Catherine is on the right track, but do we need to do this right now? I think we need to stop and pause and think about it a little bit. In getting the records of Jeff described earlier about minutes of the old meetings, it may be appropriate to see what some of the rationale was behind that language for that situation. So just a thought. We make a lot of changes based on requests in the city to the zoning code, and for the most part, you rely on me to provide my thoughts on it. And I see right now it's 27-1, or maybe 1.5. But that doesn't matter to me. My idea is to share my thoughts with you. If you, as representatives of the city being there, think this is not a problem, then that's fine. Let's move forward. And I'll fully support that idea. But I'm just suggesting to you that this is a big move, even though it's not actively enforced, because probably it hasn't had to be, that we haven't had problems with people staying more than 21 days, or maybe they're staying 30 days and nobody really cares. But, having it as a long-term rental property or a long-term residence may be a problem.
Well, Larry,
I don't know.
You're the expert.
Yeah.
Well,
I'm ready to, I think we should take the next step. Sure, let's do the research. And but what I come down to is, the city has no say who you have stay in your house or how long they stay, or if they're your friend or if they're not your friend. And this is your property, and you ought to be able to use it that way.
Well, and Bill, I agree with you, but that, you know, in the zoning districts prior to this language being there, you know, I think 3 out of the 5, you weren't even allowed to build something like this. So it's not a use by right in those. So I think we have to, you know, the argument could be made that someone who's been a longtime resident of the districts where they weren't allowed, you know, is this changing, suddenly making these quasi duplex or at least permanently, you know, inhabitable guest quarters, does that change the character of the neighborhood that they bought into when, you know, at the time? So I think for the sake of tonight, I think we've probably aired this out as much as we can without getting into details we don't have the background information for. Is everybody okay with the idea of having Jeff pull up the minutes from those meetings, and for next month's, you know, have this again for a point of discussion next month? I think that'd be January 21st is whatever the next, you know, that not the master plan meeting, special meeting, but the regular meeting. And then Larry, if you have any thoughts as what you think, you know, we should, if there's any additional language that should go in as this comes out in just the form of a memo, is everybody comfortable with that so we can move this forward?
Yes.
Yes.
Sure.
Okay.
And we have a comment from John Leo on Zoom, says, I agree with Mary Catherine. I believe this is a good change and will not be a negative to the city. This is not the same thing as approving duplexes.
And any other, that's a good reminder, Victor. Any other comments or questions from the public on the topic?
Nope, that's all I see on Zoom or YouTube.
Okay. And any other member comments, that something new thoughts, or we could or deal with next month when we have more information? And we'll obviously get that, you know, weeks in advance or a couple weeks or days in advance of the meeting. So everybody comfortable moving on to the exciting topic of political signs?
Yes.
Okay. And I don't know if Jeff or Larry sort of want to give a rundown of what the findings were. And obviously what we suspected is true, and what we don't really want to do is get into the content regulating business because it's a losing proposition. So sounds like the sensible thing to do would be to review our sign ordinances. First of all, make sure we're not regulating things we can't, and then focus more on the things that we can, which are probably, sounds like total square footage is the way to go versus number and all that. So.
Well, I started digging up a lot of stuff on signage. I found municipalities that actually did have regulations regarding political signs, but the vast majority of them don't have anything on it. They just are silent on the issue. Our ordinance, I provided you with a kind of a compilation of attached to this memo of everything the city of Harbor Springs has, and it's an extensive regulated process of signs in the city, which is not unusual because most communities deal with this very carefully, signs. And you do it by district, you do it by size, you do it by location. And everybody over the last virtually 10 years have had to modify their sign regulations to comply with all the court decisions. Found a very interesting manual on this topic. Like I think I noted in my memo, that's like 290 pages long, extremely comprehensive, but I tried to boil my memo down to the crux of the whole thing, which is we have to not regulate the content of a sign. Regulating size, regulating number, regulating location is the basics of what we can do. And so when it comes to political signs, today in the city of Harbor Springs, technically, people that were running for office that had signs out in yards were in violation of the zoning code, because it doesn't address it, and if it's not there, you can't do it. But I don't think anybody enforces that. So thus you get down to the enforcement side of, well, you can have that. I'll throw out a number of 5 political signs in your yard, or you can have one for every type of person that's going to be running. whether it's a presidential election, you can vote for president, you can vote for, a senator, a congressman, or so on down the a governor, your
Drain
representative. So if there's 10 people, 10 different slots running, you could have 10 different signs in your yard. If you want to say no, you just have to put it down to 5 in your yard. Then you can, if that's a number that you want to use, fine. If you want to say just 1, you could do that too, probably. If you got to regulate size, how big they can be. So this is a real tough issue. This is not an easy issue at all. And there's nothing that says we have to conclude our discussion on this topic today. In my opinion, we probably shouldn't, because we really need to give this an awful lot of thought about political signs. We had, I think it was 2 or 3 people, Jeff, that made comment to you about political signs this year. And that's the first time in my 30 years that this has ever been an issue in the city of Harbor Springs. So it's something, I see your mouth moving, Jeff, but I don't hear you, so.
You're muted, Jeff.
Yeah, it came up with the last election 4 years ago. That was the first time that I was aware of anything. We received a couple of complaints regarding 1 or 2 situations in town. And at that time, it didn't seem like it was very much. So we just kind of, let things lie and let things go as they were. And we kind of relied on the language that the Michigan Department of Transportation has regarding where signs can be as our regulation. Or that's what we did at the time. So this last election, we did receive more complaints about more locations. There were probably 3 or 4 locations in town. Not that we had overwhelming complaints, but there were basically 2 types of complaints. One was regarding the number of signs that were in a specific yard. I think the property owner had, 8 or 10 signs, all for one individual, running for office. Another one was another location where they had 1 larger sign. So those are kind of the nature of the 2 situations.
And I guess we could probably just, the next item on the agenda is flags. And I think that probably really, whether it's a flag or a sign, the content is probably where we're wrong. The current zoning code, I don't believe allows, we are regulating content by default by saying what you can do. So we probably ought to just, whatever changes we make in terms of content ought to be applied to the flag. Because I think wasn't that, Jeff, one of the main things that brought this onto the agenda in the first place was somebody actually complained about a neighbor's flag.
That was a separate complaint. We had a specific property owner, and I think it's a situation of 2 neighbors not getting along. One of them had a flag for a university that they had attended, and there was a complaint about having the university flag up and whether that was appropriate or not. And that's what brought that to.
Specifically, that complaint was a university flag on a pole below the American flag, where there's, I guess, apparently flagpole laws that they were citing that you can't have a university flag below an American flag. Anyway, it was really a neighbor dispute about other issues. The neighbors have been disputing for several years. It's just one of those things that arise in a dispute between neighbors that they like to call City Hall about.
And
the changing character of the city, right?
yes. And Larry, I guess as you said, we're not gonna solve this in one meeting, but it seems like, I don't know if number of sign, because how do you, I think there was one thing in your memo that resonated with me. It was sort of like we do with commercial, is you can have X square footage of sign in your, temporary signs in your yard, and they have to come down within X number of days of the race. Is there a good example you've seen in your years of doing this, or we could borrow from another city and review at the next meeting, which is kind of how to handle this legally, but also not just let it be all very open-ended like it's been?
Certainly there, I ran just several communities that had, I thought, good sign regulations, and they're more urban areas, but I can certainly cherry pick out of those the most appropriate regulations that would apply to the city and provide you with those without having to give you the 25 pages of sign regulations.
And I guess
Larry?
including all the regulations that we have with the memo was helpful, but I think just to clarify, we're really talking about, more in the residential districts, although these would apply to commercial. I mean, the permanent signs in the CBD and waterfront, we don't need to, other than to go through those and just make sure we're compliant. I don't think we really regulate content in any of those.
No, we do not.
Okay, so really this would be, just so everybody's clear, does that make sense? We're really talking about temporary signs that are most likely during a political race, but we won't say. I mean, I think the one other good advice was that they don't even designate whether it's a campaign related sign or whether it's just any temporary sign. So.
And one of the things the police chief had asked us to do was to make sure with what we're looking at here, because you bring up the point of temporary signs like garage sale signs, open house signs for realtors, things of that nature, make sure that we're appropriately addressing those, because apparently the police get calls enough about those types of signage in the city that it's a bit of a problem for law enforcement. So we need to look at that also.
Larry, I have a question about, in general, for signs on residential properties, what I guess zoning principles or allow us even to regulate signage, for example? I mean, when we think about zoning, we think about regulating, like health and welfare and et cetera. So what allows, I guess, in the Michigan State Zoning Enabling Act or Plan Enabling Act that even allows us to regulate signs, and why? I mean, what's the purpose for it? Is it for clutter? Is it for aesthetics?
Yes,
what is the reason?
it's certainly not to suppress speech or free speech or anything, but it's more of the health, safety, and welfare. The whole notion of clutter. There was a famous situation was in the city of Grand Haven where a guy used his entire home for writing his philosophy on life. It was an older home, and he would go out with a brush and paint messages on his home and paint messages over messages constantly, year after year. And they had this gentleman in court constantly for violations of the city sign ordinance, and the city finally prevailed. But it literally took them years, and the house was just a huge message board. And so it's aesthetics, it's clutter. It's, not all signs are freestanding signs. A lot of people put signs attached to their homes. Now, the city of Harbor Springs, to my knowledge, in most communities don't have many problems like this because people are respectful of each other and they don't have a lot of signs on their property. But we occasionally have a person in a community or in a county that thinks they need to tell everybody what their opinions are. And all of a sudden there's signs that start coming out. And if you don't have a regulation to prevent that from happening, or that are reasonable, then we end up with a problem of trying to enforce something.
Yes, my thought would be then, and I think would be to make sure that we have the purpose of why we're doing this is written into the ordinance, because we want to be clear that the purpose that we're regulating these signs is for the health, safety, and welfare, and whether that's the clutter that causes or whatever it may be. We want to make sure we emphasize the purpose we're doing this. So it's not, so the purpose doesn't appear we're doing this because we want to limit political signs or real estate signs, but it's for this specific purpose that's allowed per the Zoning Enabling Act.
Right. Okay. We can do that.
Jack, did you have a comment?
I did not, sorry.
Okay.
Thanks, Larry.
Anyone else
Welcome.
have any thoughts or
I have
comments?
a question about the flagpoles. That is not a true rule, didn't I read that you can't hang a college sign along university sign next to the.
It's probably not a true rule. That was just what the individual was telling city staff.
It didn't, Jeff, did you, and we can maybe wrap up signs and get to this. I sort of blended these two together, but Jeff, did you find in the city code that, other than the state of Michigan and the American flag, you're not supposed to fly any other flags? And I imagine that really came more out of the central business district, trying to get people not to have sort of advertisement flags, but it also maybe applied to residential.
Yeah, the full wording is something to the effect of the state of Michigan flag, the United States flag, and then there's a caveat at the end, or any other flag approved by city council.
Right.
And my example of that is the little red open flags that the Chamber of Commerce sells to businesses downtown. I know that that's one that is an example of that city council did approve.
And that rule applies to the residential districts as well as central business district?
It's in the general code, so yes.
So that's in the city code, not in the zoning code, or it is in the zoning code?
It's in the zoning code.
It is, okay. So I
Yes.
guess,
So
Thank you, Larry.
this is Mary Catherine. And Andrew, I don't know how you want to proceed with this, and Larry, I really appreciate you adding the pieces of the code that are relevant. But it's really hard to parse through that. And I say that as somebody who parses through regulations a fair amount. I mean, the way I read this, not only are flags not allowed, but you're actually not allowed more than one sign in your yard. So anybody who put up more than one political sign was technically out of compliance with the zoning regulation, because there's nothing in there about temporary political signs or anything like that that we could put up. So again, I appreciate your earlier comment about, we don't have an enforcement officer running around, but then it causes problems for those times when you do have somebody who complains and says, well, my neighbor's got 7 signs out, and technically the code only allows 1. Well, if you make them take down 6, then you got to make the person next door who's only got 2 take down 1 too. So I think it would be helpful, and I don't know if it's something you can do or somebody else, to really go through this and be like, okay, so if you own a house, here's what you can do or can't do per the city code right now. And that would help us then think about where we wanted our strategy to go with this. Because I mean, obviously parsing through this is not really possible tonight.
yeah.
That's why I highlighted that area. Victor has it up on the common screen, limitation on number of signs, and that's applicable. Unless it's provided otherwise in the code that you can have more, like in a commercial district. So in the residential district.
I mean, like, technically I was in violation for like 6 weeks because I had, I think, 4 signs in my yard during the political season. I mean, I don't think anybody complained, Victor. There were certainly plenty of other people up and down my street who had multiple signs in their yards. But yeah.
Lawbreakers come in all shapes and sizes, don't they?
So do confessions, yeah. So, well, I guess, and my screen froze for a minute, so I missed part of that. But does that give you enough, Larry, to work on for the next
Yes.
month?
Oh, yes. There's a lot to work on here, and I needed to have some idea of given the parameters I provided you, some direction of what I need to do.
And does everybody, and I'm sorry, my screen froze, so I had to relog in, but does everybody agree that we're really talking more about that highlighted sentence where it's regulating to only 1, unless otherwise permitted, because that really applies to the residential district?
Yes, it does.
Okay. Does everybody agree with that? That's more what we're focused on at the moment?
Yes.
Well, it strikes me when Larry put this excerpt together, we have a lot of regulations on signs. It is complex, like Larry was warning us. And but gosh, if there's any way to simplify and streamline and make it more easily understandable, that would be tremendous. I think that'd be great work we could do.
There's a lot of things that need to be done. It's a matter of prioritizing what gets done first. Right now we're working on the master plan, and usually after you do a master plan, you get into the zoning code and making modifications to that to make sure that it's consistent with the master plan document. And I think we need to focus on the master plan, getting that, take care of any zoning code things that are really important right now and are immediate, and then saving basically the sign thing, in my opinion, just saving that for a more comprehensive rewrite of the whole zoning code. Because it's a big one. Zoning regulations on signage can be either in the zoning code, or they can be in a separate ordinance altogether, in the general law ordinance of the city. And a lot of communities do it that way. They put their sign regulations in a separate segment of the city zoning code, or the general code of the city. So it's there's advantages to that also, of putting it in the general code. So with that, I do have enough direction here at this point in time to resolve the political sign and the flag situation that we have in the city, and can provide you a suggestion for our January meeting.
Great.
I recall from discussions years ago that political signs have some special privilege. And I may be wrong, but it seems to me that we ran into this with political signs years ago and had this discussion and found out that we couldn't really regulate those much. There's some regulation, but not a lot. So I would include some research in that.
Okay.
We're doing this.
I think a lot of the court decisions over the last 10, 15 years have changed attitude about political sign regulation. So we'll get into that and provide you, because there's like about 15 pages in the back of the book of court cases dealing with signs throughout the country. Anywhere from, U.S. Supreme Court to, district courts to regional, they're all over the roadmap with sign decisions.
And Larry, you feel you have, that we can kind of dovetail this, the discussion of flags. Everybody feel like we've covered that and given Larry the direction he needs. And none of us feel good about telling somebody you can't fly a university flag or any flag that's not the state of Michigan or the United States. So we probably need to modernize that rule that we have.
In my opinion, off the top of my head, and after listening to you, a person in a residential district can have basically 2 flags on 1 pole, period.
Yeah.
And leave it at that. If you want to put the Michigan flag up and the Michigan state flag up on the pole, fine. If you want to put the U.S. flag and your university flag on it, that's fine too. But it's 2 flags, and they can only be of a certain size. Generally, most residential flags are 4 by 6.
Okay.
As opposed to 10 feet by 15 feet, which a lot of commercial operations will put up a huge flag on a pole. So I think regulating the size of the flag and the number of poles is all that we need to do.
That seems adequate. And that, again, we're not making any decisions on it. We're just going to look at the language you're proposing next month. So,
right.
Victor, do you have a comment?
Oh yeah, my only comment was, maybe can you look into a special rules that apply to flags? Like I know country flags, like American flag, has to be above a state flag. So whose responsibility would it be to enforce if, let's say, the college flag is above the American flag, or if the state flag is above the American flag? Because I know there's general flag rules or codes. I don't know if it's state or national.
Is that more etiquette than really? I know.
I guess we should figure out, is it more etiquette, or is it a rule?
Yeah, I'm on a website talking about the flag, the National Flag Code, but I don't think it's truly a law. There is a lot about flag etiquette. So yeah, it's right out, readily available. We can check it out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
So yeah, Larry, you could just do that, just because, and who'd be the business of enforcing that if there is more than just etiquette? We have Jeff going out there and telling people that, your Michigan state flag has to be at the bottom because Michigan's better. That's a joke, but anyway.
I nominate Mark Boudet to be the flag regulation department.
Above my pay grade.
Pretty sure there is US code around flags, but I don't know if it's just general desecration of flags or if it's actually the rules about how you fly them. But I'm almost positive there's actual federal law.
Yeah, it's the latter. It's the latter, Mary Catherine.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll be in compliant with those to the extent that they exist, as that's the intent, so.
Yeah.
Any other comments on those agenda items of the political signs and flags? We could, if not, we can move on to member comments. Do we have any member comments? Going once, going twice?
I've got one. And Jeff, this is a follow-up to the October meeting. And John Leo, I remember, had written a letter about, I think, one of our disputed things, maybe it was the walls or the terrace. And Nancy Rondell was in the audience too. And there was some talk about whether or not you could give us a heads up on trends and issues that you were seeing. And as I recalled, you were going to take away an action item to look at, what kind of a report or a summary you could do with minimal work that could be helpful to this commission.
So we currently, and I think we do it sometime around April or May, we do an annual zoning report to, I believe it goes to the Planning Commission. I think that may even get forwarded to the City Council. I'm not positive on that. In addition to that, based on that comment that we had, I'm looking at two possibilities, but essentially some type of a log of events that occur. I mean, obviously, when I give my current report, I'm really detailing what was approved. We had X number of zoning permits, we had X number of sign permits, and I'm kind of giving you the details on that. And I think one of the thoughts was, let's get some more details on maybe other conversations that lead to non-approvals, where I tell somebody that we can't do that because it's been denied, or so I think what I've come up with at minimum will be creating basically like a call log or just a report of, this issue came up X number of times, and just kind of, logging that down, jotting that down. I did reach out to a company that may have a software, and depending on, I think we got back that the cost was fairly minimal, but there may be a possibility that we can have some software where I can keep that information, but then also it provides an ability for property owners to log onto our website and report an issue that way if they so choose. That's another thing that I wanted to modify my practices on, is how we log and track our issues that come to our attention where there may be a zoning violation or report from a community member that something's going on, so that we can better keep track of efforts, efforts that property owners or whatnot might bring to our attention that there may be an issue, but also then keeping track of our efforts to determine whether or not there is a zoning issue, and then the process that we're taking and what status we are in that process for achieving an end goal. So that if a planning commission member or a city council member or a member of a community that has reported an issue will have a better way to maintain and track where we are with something. That's my thought, my goal.
Oh, that sounds interesting, So like when in the past where we've said, well, how many complaints have we gotten on short-term rentals? You could just look at this log and tell us we've had 7 over the last 6 months.
Yeah. At this time, with a question like that, it's, I'm going off, the top of my head with, what do I recall? Yeah. Whereas that, the thought is put it on a spreadsheet where I can search by short-term rentals and say, yes, I've had 7. I had 1 on this day. I had 2 on this day, even keeping track then of which properties they were complaints about, so that we have more specific data and information to base our decisions on.
Great.
That's good.
Well, I heard 2 really valuable things in there. That was one of them. And then your other item that you highlighted is about approvals that you don't give, or about rejections. And that could be just as valuable. So.
Yeah. Good. Any other? Go ahead.
Go ahead, Andrew.
Nope. I was just asking if there are any other comments on that topic.
How do you see that rolling out, Jeff?
I haven't completely put that together yet. We've been discussing it, how that would work. I'm gonna aim for beginning of the year, let's say, to start tracking that information and then bring that information to the Planning Commission, maybe on a quarterly basis. So you're getting more frequent updates than just the once a year.
Great.
That sounds like a big improvement to me. How does everybody else feel? Mary Catherine, you had a thought, I think, in that last meeting.
No, I think that's a great plan moving forward. I mean, I agree that, you know, just to give us more information so that as we come to these decisions, we feel a little bit more informed and a little bit more like we have a pulse on not just what our thoughts are, but what the community is thinking. Yes.
Great.
I think if we just did a quarterly, you know, an agenda item that was the, you know, officer's report, you know, be the zoning administrator's, you know, log, and he could run through them quickly, and we would all have it in advance of the meeting. And if there was one that we all noticed was popping up frequently, maybe that's a section of the code that we need to dig into further. So I think it's a good idea. Okay. Any other comments on that, or any other general member comments before we adjourn?
Good.
I just want to make one.
Thanks for thinking that through, Jeff. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Bill. I just want to make one comment that we are sending out the master plan letters about the master plan surveys to residents probably tomorrow or Monday. So about probably by the end of next week, most Harbor Springs residents should be getting those letters to take the survey, or asking them to take the survey. And we're going to give them about a month to take those surveys. There's 12 of them. All of them are up on the website now. And hopefully then we'll come at the first February meeting, and the master plan meeting in February, to review those survey results with the Planning Commission. So we'll have everyone take those results. I'll take those surveys by January 21st. Larry, Jeff, and I will analyze them and compile them in a meaningful way to present to you guys. And then we can have that one discussion in February about that, those results. So then that can help us inform our goal making, objective making process in the months that follow that. So that's all I want to say.
Thank you. Any other member comments before we move to the final item on the agenda?
You do have a public chat from John Leo that says, "Thank you. This will be a very valuable tool regarding what Bill Mulder and Jeff Grimm were talking about. Once created, monthly reports would be useful, more real time."
Great. Okay. Any other comments on from members? Okay. Does everybody feel good about adjourning the meeting?
Yes.
So
Yes.
moved.
If we have to.
Yes, I'd say meeting is adjourned.